glad that you agreed to talk with us this afternoon, Randy.
Thanks, Martin. I'm happy to be here virtually. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but as I recover from COVID-19, I'm sure most of you would prefer not to hang out with me in person. But it's always fun to get in front of 100 people and talk about 10 years of your life that you have to put in the lose column. But I think there are some valuable lessons here and some important takeaways. So I think what I'll do is I've just got a short video that I'll kind of narrate over that shows what RAD Urban was as a company, and I'll talk about these lessons learned, what we did right, and I think where we fell short. So RAD Urban was a vertically integrated design build general contractor and real estate developer. We were focused on prefabricated, pre-finished, volumetric modular construction, kind of a mouthful. We developed a series of multifamily and mixed-use projects in the Bay Area over, I don't know, maybe a 6-year span or so. Delivered about 1,200 finished modules, all type 1 and type 2 construction, so non-combustible. The goal was to get to high-rise construction, and we were right on the cusp of starting our first high-rise project when we failed. You'll see a bunch of images of our factory. The factory was about 140,000 square feet, employed about 200 workers, and could deliver about 5 volumetric modules per day. Our first project was just a 5-unit test project. Our largest completed project was a little over 200 units. And the factory was in the California Central Valley. The factory used union labor. And the idea here was to employ lean principles, to have a pull system, and to match the erection rate at the job site to the production rate at the factory, and really minimize inventory all the way through. And in a lot of respects, we were successful. We checked many of the boxes that we intended to check, but ultimately we're not successful as a company. But we were both producing and erecting at a rate of over 100 modules per month. And people show you these videos of, oh, we did 100 modules in 3 days. But our goal was to do 100 modules a month, day in, day out, or month in, month out, and have a sustainable business, as opposed to ramping up to erect a building in a week, and then having this erection crew sitting around for another 6 months before the next one was ready to go. So that's just a little background on RAD Urban. And let's see, I will stop sharing. Okay, so that was the company. Our last project was completed about 2 years ago. And so what can I take away from this? Really 10 years of my life, and the team that came with me. So I think the first thing that we were able to establish, and that I will take with me going forward, is that this core thesis of industrialization around labor savings is quite valid. And we really found that by moving an operation from a job site exposed to the weather, up 100 feet in the air, and by putting that on a production line with a repetitive task, and the work piece in front and the tools on the left and the materials on the right, we could readily achieve a doubling, a tripling, even a 10-fold improvement in productivity. And so that was pretty dramatic. And so when you look at the labor savings, it was quite real, especially when you multiply that by the fact that our labor rate in the field was well north of $100 an hour, and in the factory, an all-in labor rate was $35 an hour. So if you figure an hourly rate of around 1/3 and a productivity rate between 2 and 10x, you know, the cost of labor was almost eliminated, at least to the extent that it could be moved off-site. Now, on the flip side, you know, we had to, that was offset by dramatically increased logistics costs, engineering costs, the overhead associated with operating the factory, capital costs, and so on. But that central thesis about labor savings, right? The Henry Ford Model T assembly line moment was very real. The other thing that we learned was, you know, there was this guy Wright with a W, you know, doing research, operations research, I think around World War II, and you know, he discovered in, you know, in airplane manufacturing, I believe it was, that, you know, every time you doubled your output, you experienced a 10% improvement in your labor hours. And, you know, that curve varies depending on a lot of factors, but we experienced that same thing again on the labor side, where we started producing these modules at 800 hours per module. And, you know, after 1,000 modules, that was on the neighborhood of 300 hours per module, and it was still going down. Now, I'll say it wasn't an accident, or it wasn't automatic. You couldn't just stand back and expect that to happen. But with a focused effort on improving productivity, you know, we found that the more we produced, the faster we got, and there was no end at all in sight. So that, you know, that was incredible. The other thing, and Frederic, I think, touched on this, was this supply chain question. And there's no doubt that there's a huge amount of value trapped in the traditional construction supply chain. When you look at material and products that are manufactured in China, sold through distributors to wholesalers to subcontractors to general contractors, and ultimately to the owner, with substantial markups at each step, you know, we saw it. We saw that for any given material line item, if we put a focused effort into it, we could generally procure it at 40%, 50% of the cost of what we could buy it locally. But it was a huge amount of effort. And so if you had a bill of materials for a module with 500 or 600 lines in it, we just didn't have the volume or the resources to pursue direct purchasing and you know, really an advantaged supply chain strategy on every line item. But on the line items that we could focus on, there were those 40, 50% savings. But then there was another cost in that you had to order many, many months in advance, and you had to pay for those materials in advance. And so that ended up tying up a lot of capital, and ultimately contributed to us just running out of money, which obviously is a pretty huge problem for a startup business. You saw in the video, you know, I had a kind of a novel thesis going in, and that one of the challenges I saw over and over again in modular construction was all these buildings that I saw in the modular industry 10 years ago always had these redundant wall assemblies and redundant floor ceiling assemblies. And so I thought, wow, you know, great, if I can go into a factory and we can save 30% by industrialization, but then if we're building 30% more building because every surface is duplicated, then we haven't really saved anything. And so one of the concepts that we tried and we put a lot of effort into at RAD Urban was building, instead of a 6-sided box, a 4-sided box. And we chose to be open on the top and open on the side. And, you know, in some ways this really worked, and in some ways this really didn't work. In that, you know, we managed to achieve those 30–40% savings through industrialization in the factory and managed to deliver them to the job site and not spend all that extra money by having these doubled up assemblies. But then we got crushed in the field having to do all of these joint treatments, right? Thousands and thousands of lineal feet of joint treatments. Whereas, if we had just gone ahead and delivered a 6-sided box, the installation would have been dramatically simpler and faster and with less labor. So we didn't have redundant material, but we had a lot of extra labor on site. And then finally, people said, well, what if it rains? Well, first project, no problem, got through it. Second project, no problem, got through it, used a engineered temporary root system. Third project, number of years ago, major winter storm came in over a holiday weekend. And, and surprise, surprise, our temporary waterproofing system failed. And I think this is a real and ongoing challenge with volumetric modular construction, where, we had many millions of dollars of finished modules in a building that did not have a permanent roof. And we ended up having to rebuild most of those modules on site. You can imagine that was a painful experience. So net, that was kind of a bold experiment, and I have to say, not one that I'd like to repeat. So, what are some of the big takeaways and things that I think we need to do differently going forward? I think the number one thing for me is that we at RAD Urban, we scaled up too quickly. And I thought I was solving a problem when we made that decision and I was creating another one. I saw that early modular manufacturers often had empty factories. They were spending a lot of money on marketing and trying to get clients, and they do a project and their factory would be empty and they'd get another one. And it was obvious that that wasn't sustainable. So I'm a developer, let me tee up a series of projects, of progressively larger projects. And, and then when we start this modular business, we'll have several years of runway of our own captive projects to get this figured out. And, that made a lot of sense. But we made two big mistakes there. One, we had a misalignment of capital in that the capital that was funding our project pipeline was not the same capital that we had raised to fund our manufacturing, our industrialized construction business. And so, our first couple projects were really prototypes, were really pilot projects. And yet we had real estate investors saying, Randy, I don't care about your industrialization problems and about this business you're building. We signed up to be your partner in these apartment buildings. Get them delivered, hold your price, the rest is your problem. And that really was a RAD Urban problem, was a misalignment of capital between what really were pilot projects and this business that we were trying to launch. That ended up, I think, being deadly in the end when you combine that with the fact that these were very large projects ultimately. And so the project that really brought RAD Urban down was a $200 million project. And I think that's an incredibly difficult thing for the industry to overcome, where you want to go through this development cycle. You want to have an idea, build a prototype, do a pilot, take the lessons learned, do it again, and go through a few of those cycles as quickly as possible. But when your product cycle is the development of a building, and it's 5 years from conception to delivery, and your minimum viable product, if you say that it's a building, now we could argue that, but if you say, okay, the minimum viable product is a building, then each cycle is 5 years and 10 or 20 or $30 million. That was tough. And so in hindsight, to do this again, I really wish that instead of lining up a $200 million project, that I had lined up 10, $20 million projects. Because one thing that we found is you go into a project, you make refinements to the module, to the connection, to the manufacturing, and almost instantly, you know whether it worked or not. 20 modules into a 600 module project. He's like, okay, this idea worked, that idea didn't work, but then you're stuck. You know, or we found that we were stuck. We weren't, you know, the real estate partner was waiting. We weren't going to go back through permitting. And so we had to deliver on the design that we had, even though we knew that it needed to be refined. And so we were stuck producing $50 million of modules that had a known issue and just fighting our way through it because we scaled up so quickly, because the projects were so large. You know, but we thought we needed to be big. You know, and there's a tension there because on the one hand, you need production, you need to be large in order to have economies of scale. On the other hand, you need to be small and quick to go through the development cycle. So I think, you know, a key to success going forward is going to be resolving those tensions. You know, I think another thing, maybe the last thing I'll touch on is just this strict discipline around productization. I think we really failed there, where, you know, we ended up with projects with 100 modules or 400 modules or 500 modules, and most of the time, every module was unique in some way, and that was deadly. And you know, and I think, you know, it seems so obvious in hindsight, but it's very easy with customers and architects and design review boards and all the traditions of construction, you know, to end up with mass customization when you're a startup just trying to learn how to industrialize. And that's a very, very challenging problem to overcome. So, I mean, I could go on for a long time about this, but, you know, the question that Daniel left me with is, you know, okay, what's the legacy? Obviously, there was kind of some painful lessons learned here. I will say we built a great team, and I think the legacy of RAD Urban is going to be the RAD Urban diaspora. And so all over the industry in industrialized construction, you'll meet veterans of RAD Urban that, you know, despite what was really a difficult experience for all of us, we're all still believers in industrialization. And so, you know, the RAD Urban team is now spread out in a lot of different places, carrying the ball forward. And so, you know, and me personally, I'm taking the lessons learned that are really what's left of the substantial investment in RAD Urban, and you know, and building RAD 2.0. And so that'll be my legacy, I hope.
Yeah.